chair of this Board of Inquiry. I'm joined by my fellow board members, Member Michael Graham, Member Tom Chapman, and Member Todd Inman. As a reminder, Member Brown is on launch to a highway crash in Florida, and our thoughts are with him and certainly those who lost loved ones in that crash. So, Mr. Brazy, please start us off with a safety briefing.
Thank you, Chair Hamady. If you have not already done so, please silence your electronic devices. Leonie, do you have the safety slides, please? The address of our boardroom is 429 LaFont Plaza, Southwest Washington, D.C. We have approximately 150 attendees in the room here today. The restrooms are located in the lobby to the left as you exit the boardroom. In the event of an emergency, we have designated NTSB personnel to certain roles. Please stand as I call your name and remain standing until the conclusion of the safety briefing. Tim LeBaron will dial 911. Jen Adler will meet emergency personnel outside the front doors. There's a defibrillator located in the lobby just outside the doors in front of me. Elias Cantanas will retrieve it if needed. Sabrina Woods is trained and willing to use the device. Lorenda Ward is trained and willing to perform CPR. Fire extinguishers are located near all exits, 2 behind the dais down the stairs, 2 at the back of the boardroom where you entered, and 1 by security. Deidre Estes will run and retrieve one if needed. We have a first aid kit in conference room A. This is the room closest to the security area. The kit's on the counter in a blue pouch. Dana Schultz will retrieve it if needed. If there is a need to evacuate for any reason, please follow Rochelle McAllister, who will lead you to the exit route, and she will be wearing a yellow vest. Please walk quickly, don't run, to the rear of the auditorium. Go out the doors, proceed through the lobby past security, go up the stairs and straight ahead through the glass doors to the outside. Once outside, turn left and follow the sidewalk to the end of the street. That is our rally point. Please do not return to the boardroom until instructed to do so. Next slide. The wheelchair accessible exit instructions are as follows. Kelly Hessler will lead you to the exit route. She will also be wearing a yellow vest. Go out the doors, proceed through the lobby, past security. Immediately turn left and exit through the door, which will take you into the parking garage. To exit the garage, turn right, proceed up the ramp, and go outside. Once outside, turn left and follow the sidewalk to the end of the street, which is our rally point. Should the unthinkable occur and there is an active shooter, the FBI recommends that you run, hide, or fight in that order. Running improves your chances of survival. Leave your belongings behind and don't stop until you've reached a safe location. Keep your empty hands raised and clearly visible when exit the building, and follow all instructions from police. If there is no escape route, hide. Silence your cell phone. Do not call 911 until it is safe, and fight only as a last resort. Next slide. If there's a need to shelter in place due to an emergency, we will remain in this auditorium. We are below ground and in a secure location. If such a situation arises, we will make an announcement. Staff and security will guide anyone in the lobby into this room. We will then secure the doors until the danger passes. Next slide. Lastly, I'd like to remind everyone that each of us has a vital role to play in any emergency. If you see something concerning or suspicious, say something to one of our NTSB or security staff right away. If you have any questions or concerns, don't hesitate to come talk to any member of the NTSB staff. Chair Hamady, that concludes my remarks.
Thank you, Mr. Brazy. And just for everyone here, first of all, I would encourage, we obviously switched and we tried to get word out, but I think people are in from out of town and might not have casual wear. Whatever casual wear you have, if you want to bring it back, I don't think any of us care if you want to wear jeans. You're here. That doesn't matter to me. I would rather you be comfortable and cool than feel like you have to look a certain way here. whether you're in the audience, whether you're back in the media room, or you're a party, a witness, or anybody on the technical panel, and certainly everyone knows it back here, it is hot. Just so you know, the compressor broke. Of course it did, because we are here for a hearing. That's another issue. If the press wants to report that I'm calling GSA, I'm definitely going to do that. With that said, we're trying to get more ice here. We have more fans coming, but we're probably going to take more frequent breaks than we did yesterday, just so people can take a break. It is hot, especially with these lights. I would encourage strongly anyone to, if you aren't feeling well, if you feel faint, it's your health and safety we're a safety agency. Your health and safety is more important. And so, if you want to raise your hand or leave or walk out, or you need something, please do speak up, okay? And I know it's hot over there. So usually witnesses feel like they have to be right there. Do not feel that way, today. I would rather you be safe than anything happen, okay? Everybody good? All right. All right, so introducing our technical panel and those supporting our technical panel. Obviously, you've heard from Doug Brazing, who is our hearing officer. We have John Lovell, who is the investigator in charge for this investigation. We have Picholo Cruz, who is lead aerospace engineer. We have Nils Johnson, aviation accident investigator for maintenance. And we have Dr. Sabrina Goods, senior human performance investigator. In the back row, supporting those on the technical panel are Ms. Leani Benitez Cardona, who will operate the audio visuals. We have Sierra Giuliano, who will operate the timer. And we have Tim LeBaron, who's director of our Office of Aviation Safety. And behind me is Eric Johnson from our Office of General Counsel to provide legal support. Introducing the parties. As I call your name, each party representative, please identify yourself and then introduce others at your table, and we'll start in alphabetical order. ALPA, Airline Pilots Association.
Good morning, Madam Chair. My name is Steve Jangelis, Captain Steve Jangelis with the Airline Pilots Association. I'm the Aviation Safety Chair for our group. Joining me today is Captain Mark Henniger. He's our party coordinator for this accident. Captain Brian Moynihan, the Alaska Airlines Safety Chair. Captain Craig Boxrucker, subject matter expert. Mr. Chris Heck, our lead engineer, and Captain Jeff Perrin, our ALPA Accident Investigation Board Chair.
Wonderful. Thank you, Alaska Airlines.
Good morning, Chair. Thank you. Max Tidwell, the Vice President of Safety for Alaska Airlines. In Council, we have Peter Geltz, who is our advisor, John Seitz, Director of Flight Ops Safety for Alaska Airlines, and Jason Lai, our Managing Director of Engineering for Alaska Airlines.
Thank you. Mr. Heipel for Association of Flight Attendants.
Good morning. I'm Seth Heipel. I serve as the AFA Air Safety Health and Security Chairperson at Alaska and as the AFA Party Coordinator for this accident. With me this morning are Chris Wachowski, Director of the Air Safety Health and Security Department at AFA, Dinker Mokadam, AFA's OSHA Specialist, Rhonda Ruderman, Chair of AFA's Aircraft Technical and SAE Committees, and Steve Vincent, AFA's investigator for this accident.
And I saw and talked with your president, Sarah Nelson, earlier, and it's nice that she showed up to lend her support to you all. Very nice. Federal Aviation Administration.
Good morning, Chair. David Gerlach. I'm the manager of the Office of Accident Investigation and your spokesperson today for the agency. To my right is Mr. Matt Grigsby, who is our party coordinator in FAIC. And to his right is Scott Van Buren. He's a senior technical advisor for the Office of Accident Investigation. And then to his right is Brian Kilgore from the Office of Aircraft CERT. And then from our Chief Counsel's office, Chris Stevens.
Thank you. International Association of Machinists and Aerospace Workers.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My name is John Holden. I'm president of Machinist Union District 751. To my right is Daniel Swank. He's our grievance coordinator. And we also have John Petrozelli. He's an AMT on our flight line in Seattle and also assigned to the accident investigation. I also have our general counsel, Jonathan Shapiro, and as a witness, we have business rep Lloyd Catlin.
Thank you. And Spirit AeroSystems.
Morning, Chair, Committee. My name is Heather Meyer, Vice President of Quality for Spirit AeroSystems, and with me I have Mark Dombroff, Counsel, as well as previous witnesses, Scott Graybon and Mike Riney.
Thank you very much. And as a reminder, only party spokesperson may question the witnesses on behalf of their organization. Before I go over the order of proceedings, if you are watching remotely and for some reason you can't hear or see something and you think it's an issue on our end, if you don't think we listen, we do. Yesterday, Gail from North Carolina emailed me, and we were able to address her issue, so feel free to do so. And it's chair@ntsb.gov. All right. I'd now like to provide a general overview of today's proceedings. You may wish to refer to the hearing agenda in more detail. We expect to run until about 7 p.m., though we can go longer if needed. We'll break for an hour for lunch, and as I mentioned, we will have more frequent breaks because it is so hot. Panel 3 will begin in a moment and will take us until lunch, and that topic is safety management systems and quality management systems. Following lunch, Panel 4 will cover FAA oversight, or Federal Aviation Administration oversight. For each panel, we'll follow the same process as yesterday. Mr. Brazy will reintroduce the members of the technical panel and swear them in. Witnesses will then be questioned in the following order. First by the NTSB technical panel, second by the parties, and third by the Board of Inquiry, which is the board of the NTSB. On behalf of the board, I'd like to thank the witnesses for being here today and for testifying. We really appreciate it. It is critical. You're a critical part of our investigation. The information you share is helpful as part of our investigation to develop the facts around the investigation so that we can do the analysis at a later point. So really appreciate you being here and your efforts. Mr. Brazy, please go through, explain, or describe the exhibits.
Thank you, Chair Hamady. Exhibits for this hearing include reports produced by NTSB investigative staff, videos, and other documents submitted by the technical panel members, witnesses, and parties to support the testimony and questions you will hear today. The exhibits for this hearing are in the public docket. That docket number is SA, like Sierra Alpha, 543. The NTSB is authorized by statute to disclose information to carry out its mission, but we protect the confidentiality and proprietary information to the greatest extent possible. As such, the exhibits contain redactions. These are the result of negotiations between the parties and the NTSB regarding the disclosure of information claimed to be personally identifiable, security sensitive, or proprietary in nature. Though redacted, the exhibits contain sufficient information so that members of the public can refer to them during the hearing and throughout the NTSB investigation. The exhibits are entered into the record, and any presentations, along with other records of the investigation, become part of the NTSB public docket, which are available now via the NTSB website, ntsb.gov. The public docket opened yesterday. Party spokespersons and witnesses have been provided electronic copies of the public docket containing the exhibits identified above. The docket is located on the investigation page, which you can access in one of two ways: visiting ntsb.gov, or if you've joined us in person, you can scan the QR code on the back of the hearing agenda. On the investigation page, you will find a link to the public docket on the right-hand side just above the map. A transcript of the testimony is prepared and entered into the docket as soon as possible. In addition, Mr. Johnson will keep a list of any documents that are admitted during the hearing, which are not currently exhibits in the NTSB public docket. As a reminder, if a party to the hearing has a new exhibit to propose in accordance with 49 CFR 845.9, it will not be admitted unless the chair determines that good cause has been shown. These documents will be submitted after the hearing and entered into the public docket. Chair Hamady, that concludes my remarks. Thank you.
Thank you. And will you please introduce, well, we've already introduced the members of the technical panel, so why don't you go ahead and swear in the witnesses?
Thank you. I do have a point of order. We did have a witness scheduled on this panel. Mr. Bartron had a death in the family and is unable to join us today. Chair Hamady, the next panel is on safety management systems and quality management systems. The panel will address the following topics: safety management systems, including the process of promoting effective safety culture; quality management systems, what they are, how they relate to manufacturing, and recent challenges; the dissemination and communication of policies at Boeing and Spirit AeroSystems; evolution of the production rate at Boeing; FAA's action on the NTSB's 2021 recommendation on safety management systems for manufacturing; and finally, changes that have been made at Boeing and Spirit AeroSystems since the accident. Witnesses for panel 3 are composed by the following individuals. From my left, nearest the board members, Mr. Paul Wright, Senior Director, Safety Management System and Chief of the Aerospace Safety Office at Boeing Commercial Airplanes; Mr. Hector Silva, Vice President for Regulatory Compliance and Core Quality at Boeing; Mr. Doug Ackerman, Vice President of Supplier Quality at Boeing; Mr. Greg Brown, Senior Vice President for Quality and Support at Spirit AeroSystems; Mr. Bill Brown, Senior Advisor for Quality at Spirit AeroSystems; Mr. Chris Ike, Aerospace Engineer in the Policy and Standards Division at the Federal Aviation Administration; Mr. Steve Slagle, Program Manager in the Project Management Section at the FAA; Mr. Brian Knupp, Manager of the System Operation and Oversight Branch at the FAA; and Mr. Lloyd Catlin, Business Representative at the International Association of Machinists and Aerospace Workers. I will now ask that the witnesses on the panel not previously sworn in please stand. Raise your right hand and please answer by saying, "I do." Do you swear or affirm that the testimony you will give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Thank you. Please be seated. As a reminder to the witnesses, you will remain under oath until the conclusion of the hearing. We ask that you answer the questions factually and avoid analysis. Finally, please push the microphone button to talk and push it again when finished. Chair Hamady, these witnesses have been pre-qualified and their respective experience and qualifications appear in the docket as exhibits. I would now like to turn the questioning over to Dr. Woods.
Thank you, Mr. Brazy. Good morning, gentlemen. We are actually going to talk about quality management systems first, before then going on to address respective safety management systems. There will be some questions that have already been asked previously in yesterday's panels. However, I feel in order to get a comprehensive understanding of your respective programs, some of those questions will be asked again. So just recognize that, please. So with that, we're going to start off with Boeing. Mr. Ackerman, we've already met, but if you would please, Mr. Silva, could you give us a high-level overview of what your roles and responsibilities are at Boeing?
Sure. Good morning. And mic check, am I coming in clear enough? Okay, thank you. So I'm the Vice President for Regulatory Compliance and Core Quality. The Core Quality organization really supports the rest of the quality team. So we don't support just one program, we support all the programs from a regulatory perspective, technical perspective, and some of our data analytics as well.
First, please, can you tell us overall what exactly is a QMS, a quality management system, and how does Boeing manage that process?
Sure. And if I can ask if we can pull up Boeing's presentation, slide 11. So QMS stands for Quality Management System, and probably the best way to describe it is as a system. It really is the comprehension of all the structure, processes, procedure, resources, basically everything we need to document, implement, and maintain the necessary requirements so that we can satisfy our technical requirements from a design perspective for conforming and compliant products, regulatory requirements, as well as customer requirements. The QMS is managed by our quality manual. It's part of a way to satisfy a regulatory requirement to have a quality manual. That quality manual describes all those policies and procedures and points to a number of different documents that then go into more detail. The quality manual is structured in a way to satisfy AS 9100, which is an industry standard in terms of requirements, but it is also written in such a way to demonstrate compliance to federal regulation requirements as well.
So given that, presuming there's a lot of data that you look at, what are some of the metrics that you routinely track under your QMS?
Sure. There's a number of metrics that we routinely track. We track, as a little bit was alluded to yesterday, we track defects within our system, so nonconformances. We track internal audit reports, the results of those findings, those corrective actions. We track rework performance, so how much time it takes to rework the airplane and make sure that we have the right resources. And we track those on a daily, weekly, monthly basis and review those in certain venues and forums.
And how is that information packaged for use? What sorts of reports or documents are produced, and at what level are they disseminated throughout the company?
Oh, sure. Perhaps we can go to the next slide, slide 12 in the presentation. So as you can imagine, with a number of policies and procedures and all the metrics that we track, there's different tier levels, like discussed yesterday with the different tiers, that information is shared. So starting on the left, we have our factory tiered meetings where all the way from a manager and their crew, they would review quality performance. That gets rolled up to senior management levels and ultimately to executive levels within the program. We also have quality management reviews where, at least on a once-a-month basis, we review audit performance, compliance action performance, and that will go as high as the airplane program leadership team. And then we also have our quality leadership reviews, and that's where we look at conformance performance. So how we're trending in terms of defects, rework, and in-service feedback. So any issues we see from our airline customers and issues we have to follow up from a quality perspective there. Those are also reviewed at executive level as well, all the way up as high as the CEO.
And to be clear, is this structure how it was back in September of 2023, or is it how that is now?
No, thank you for that. I should have noted that earlier. The structure is how it was as of September 2023. The one thing I will note is in that time period, the quality management reviews, the column that you see in the middle, we are going through a process of strengthening that to get higher level visibility. So at that point in time, those would have been reviewed more at a local level within a program. But the quality leadership reviews, those were in place as of September 2023, as well as the factory tiered meetings.
So within this data, these metrics, who or what establishes doing well versus doing poorly?
Good question. It really depends on the tier of information that you're looking at. So as you can imagine, data that is looked at a local level really starts with what the daily performance is from a defect perspective. That is typically managed by the team themselves, the manager. But as you start to get up levels in terms of looking at the overall system, that's where different levels of leadership would then assess the overall health of the system in terms of the metric performance.
Okay, so let's say you find things that are doing poorly. What happens next? What are some of the mitigation strategies that you would use to get it back in the doing well category?
Yes. So part of our overall quality management system, and I apologize, I should have mentioned it in the overall introduction, by definition and by our policies and procedures, when we see information that would tell us that we need to warrant a corrective action, we then react with mitigating actions, either from a containment perspective or overall corrective actions from a more comprehensive set of activities. And it would really depend on the nature of the issue, the findings, and the types of data that we see within the system.
So how confident are you that the data you're receiving, because presumably it's coming up from all these different levels, how confident are you that the data that you're receiving is the data that you should be receiving?
Overall, I'm very confident, very confident. And one of the reasons, a few of the reasons why we're so confident around that is one, that data, most of our leaders at multiple levels have direct access into the databases that collect that information. So they have either automated reports or direct dashboard access to see the information. Two, we do review it in multiple venues and forums to cross-check that that information is consistent. And probably the most important is going down to the floor and checking and validating that the data that we're seeing from a system level and that we're seeing in these different reports are in alignment with what we're hearing from our teammates.
And who are the people that are responsible for going down to the floor to check and see and confirm that the data is true?
It would really depend on the metric that we're talking about or the tier that we're talking about. Generally, different levels of leadership would be responsible, and ultimately we use different reporting venues to also check that as well.
I'd like to move to Spirit for now and ask some of the similar questions. As you are both Mr. Brown, I will try to preface by saying Greg Brown or William Brown, so apologies for that. But with that, Mr. Greg Brown, would you please give us a high-level overview of your roles and responsibilities at Spirit?
Yes, ma'am. Good morning. My name is Greg Brown. I am the Senior Vice President of Global Quality for Spirit. I have responsibility for the quality assurance and inspection function across all of our 12 sites globally, as well as the administration and oversight of the quality management system.
So same with Mr. William Brown. Would you give us the same?
Yes, I'm a senior advisor to Spirit AeroSystems, and what that entails is when senior executives need any assistance from me, I support those requirements. Prior to March 17th, I was the Senior Vice President of Global Quality for Spirit since June of 2022.
Thank you. So again, similar to what I asked for Boeing, Mr. Greg Brown, would you please give us an understanding of what your QMS is comprised of?
Yes. At the sake of sounding repetitive, it's very similar to what you heard from Boeing. Our quality management system, it is based on our AS9100 certification, which we've held since, I think, 2004. It's an aerospace manufacturing standard that ensures that we have all the right policies and procedures to deliver conforming, compliant product to our customers. The QMS, it does a number of things. It is a closed-loop system within Spirit, but it also relies very heavily on our customer feedback. So while we have auditors and inspectors providing a lot of our feedback internally, as well as our frontline employees, we also have a lot of data that's coming in from our customers as well.
And again, what types of data are you looking at? What metrics do you follow?
Yeah, so the primary, probably the things that are really in front of you every day are the nonconformances, whether it be in the form of rejection tags or pickups, which I think you heard yesterday. Those are telling us a lot of our quality workmanship in production. We're also looking for compliance with our procedures. We have compliance walks. We have inspections and audits that go out and they monitor our employees. We also take in data from Quality 360, which was spoke about yesterday, which is a voluntary reporting system, using all of that to try to intersect at various places throughout the production system that we need to focus our risk mitigations on.
And so for the reports that are produced from these metrics, at what level is that disseminated? Who's looking at that information?
So the data is aggregated within quality. We have a team that pulls that information together. It's actually probably one of the first stops it makes is back with the production leaders themselves, the program leaders. We have weekly program corrective action boards where we review adverse trends. We look to see if certain data is within control limits or if it's exceeding control limits, and then working together with the process owner, which is typically operations. We try to develop a corrective action plan, and we monitor that to a closure.
And who or what establishes that you are doing well or if something is doing poorly?
I think setting the control limits, again, along with operations and the various process owners, is a key aspect of understanding are we winning or losing a particular area. But beyond that, all of this data is elevated to the executive level as well, all the way up to the CEO. And then in addition to that, as mentioned by Mr. earlier, we do a lot of compliance and gimbal walks on the floor, talk to frontline employees, and really just make sure that what we're actually seeing is matching what we're hearing in the reports.
You mentioned corrective actions before, but what are some of the other mitigation strategies you have to get what might be doing poorly back in doing well?
Yeah, I would say safety promotion is it's something that has been in place for a long time at Spirit. I mean, again, I can only speak back to March 18th, but it has been in place for a while. As part of an ongoing safety management system effort, it is going to continue to be a key aspect. It's something that we're continuing to grow today. We do a lot of professional development internally, but really trying to make sure that some of this data doesn't get stuck at the upper level and mid-level management, and it gets down to the frontline employees.
We'll talk about safety management systems a little bit later on, but to be clear, does Spirit currently have a voluntary SMS?
No, we do not.
So now, given that Spirit is a major supplier for the Boeing company, how, and this is for essentially all four of you gentlemen, how does your QMS integrate with one another? How do you ensure that you are looking at the same things?
I'll start. So first of all, our quality management system has a responsibility for overseeing our supplier's quality management system. So it is a tiered system. As part of that, Boeing does audits in Spirit's quality management system. We look at the results of those audits. They are shared with Spirit. Any findings are written up in, as I mentioned yesterday, what's called a supplier evaluation record. So that oversight is one element of the way they integrate. The second thing I would say is, as Greg Brown just mentioned, the data sharing, the data transparency between their system and our system. Anything we identify during the final verifications that we do in Spirit's quality management system, data that we have from any of our programs, including the 737, on findings we have in our production system of Spirit escapes is shared back with Spirit at different levels on a daily or weekly basis.
Mr. Brown, is there anything you would like to add to that?
No, I mean, just to probably build on the daily and weekly communication with Boeing's on-site presence of their quality team. It's not just a daily interaction; it's a multiple times a day interaction. The sharing of information, the ongoing follow-up in investigations, and making sure that corrective actions are either on schedule or that we're working very closely to come up with plans to address those.
So, Mr. Ackerman, you say that part of your QMS is to, in fact, audit your suppliers. What are the sorts of things that you're looking for during those audits?
There's a variety of different audits we'll do, and I can speak specifically to Spirit, but broadly, the same is true across our supply chain. Different audit tools we use are quality management system. Well, I'll start with, as Spirit is, all of our suppliers are required to be certified to the AS9100 standard. The audits that we would do include quality management system audits at the supplier. Is their quality management system documentation adequate? Are they following it? We'll also do product audits or manufacturing audits. So we'll take a product and we'll follow it through the production system and audit, is it conforming and compliant as it moves through the production system and following the supplier's internal processes and procedures and requirements. Or we'll take a particular manufacturing process and look at product that's moving through the manufacturing process can ask the same questions. Each of the different types of audits we have a checklist. We have a number of different tools we use, and depending on what we're focused on at that particular supplier, we'll pick a checklist, a tool, and run an audit. Any findings, again, are provided to the supplier through a supplier evaluation request, and we require corrective action on that.
And again, to be clear, is this something that's been in place since January of 2024, or how long has the collaboration and the integration between your QMS been in place?
Everything I just described predates 2023. It goes back as far as I'm familiar with supplier quality for many, many years.
Okay. So snapshotting the last, let's say, 5 years, what has that audit data for Spirit looked like?
As I mentioned in yesterday's testimony, we have had we have about 15 auditors on site at Spirit and have for the last couple of years. Findings have been fairly consistent in the types of things that we have had findings on and written SIRs on. As I mentioned yesterday, FOD, tool control, compliance and access to work instructions, and part protection have predominantly been the main types of findings we've written up.
That's the type of findings. How is the data trending? Up, down, staying even?
I would say the volume over 2022-23, it varied. I would say if you were to try to draw a line through the data, it trended up. And as Spirit's put corrective action, and we've worked with Spirit to put corrective action in place, we're seeing improvements in the data.
Over what amount of time have you seen those improvements?
I'm trying to not draw a trend line through an inadequate number of data points, but I would say we've been seeing improvements in this calendar year.
Okay. Mr. Silva, does your QMS define what processes require inspections, tests, or audits? And if so, how is a person to find that information?
Yes, it does. As described earlier, in that set of policies and procedures, one of the sections of the quality manual goes and refers to the requirements for inspection and test. Typically, to answer your question in terms of how a person would find those, most of that instruction would be in the actual work instruction itself. So the installation plans that a mechanic or an inspector would follow, that would have that level of detail. But the governing requirements in terms of policies and procedures would be referenced in the quality manual and then housed in our one PPPM system. That's just the database we use for all our authoritative documents from a process perspective.
And how often is that information reviewed for clarity and accuracy?
So I believe Ms. Lund described this yesterday, but at a minimum every 5 years, and then based on feedback that we get from teammates, it could be more frequent, and that's where you see revisions or other changes to that documentation.
Does your QMS additionally define who is to perform the inspections, audits, and tests?
Yes, within those policies and procedures, details are laid out in terms of not just what the requirements are to include inspection tests, but then who performs them.
So if I'm a mechanic coming in off the street, I've recently been hired, how am I to know about all this? Where am I going to learn about how I'm going to find information to do my job?
As was discussed yesterday, most of what you would learn in terms of how you would know to accomplish a job would be through initially foundational training and then subsequently through on-the-job training. In that foundational training curriculum, that's where certain classes would cover those types of requirements, and then on-the-job training being another area where folks would learn in terms of how to follow those instructions on a more detailed to their work statement perspective.
Admittedly, this might be partially an opinion-based question, but how confident are you if I were to walk into your factory floor right now and ask a mechanic, do they know what their quality management system is and how to find information that they will be able to respond in a way that you deem efficient?
It's a tough question to answer because we actually saw some feedback during our recent FAA audit that I don't believe in this case it was mechanics, but it was other teammates that were asked that same sort of question. In the context of saying, could they directly point to a document, they struggled, but when asked some follow-on questions, they were able to describe, oh, that's our policies and procedures and our command media and our policies and pros and BPIs. So we recognize we have some work to do in terms of making sure that folks not only understand where to go to get that information in the system, but as discussed yesterday, how to simplify it significantly because it is very complex, and we recognize that.
Was that feedback on that recent? At what point did that feedback come to where you had an understanding that maybe you needed some refinement?
That was specifically in March of this year during an outbrief from an audit finding, but we also had similar type of feedback from the AXA report.
Does Boeing have a mechanism for soliciting that kind of feedback prior to an incident occurring and you receiving that?
Yes, I think some of this is going to be covered when we get to the portion of SMS, but through our reporting channels that we have within the system, those would be some of the main ways we would want to collect some of that feedback up to incorporate some of that change.
I guess what I just don't understand is that if you're just now receiving that feedback after an accident has occurred, it seems like those opinions didn't just develop all of a sudden, that they have probably been there. So I wanted to get a better understanding of why haven't those questions been asked prior to January 5th?
I would say some of those questions have been asked. What's tough about our system, and something I probably should have laid out earlier when we were giving the overall QMS overview, is just to give you some context, there are approximately 400 documents that govern our quality portion of our command media, with another about 600 or so supplemental writings that are additional layers of detail. Those documents comprise a body of knowledge that we have collected over time. And in many cases, it's feedback from our team asking for more detail to be put into the system. In other cases, it's asking for detail to be taken not necessarily out of the system, but structured in a way that's a lot easier to follow. And so we've received both types of feedback. We work really hard at making sure that feedback can be incorporated appropriately in the command media or those policies and procedures. But as mentioned, that was some of that feedback has been ongoing. The accident just helped reinforce taking the step back of how complex the overall system was from a command media perspective.
Similar questions for Spirit. Does your QMS define what processes require inspections or tests or audits?
Yes, it does. It does have a matrix for our audit requirements across our entire business plan, and then also the planning portion while developing the work instructions are where we insert our inspection points.
And how is a person to find that information were they to need it?
All employees have access to the policies and procedures, and they're taught how to access those in their initial training. And then the inspection points are they're essentially made available to mechanics and inspectors as they're assigned job tasks.
So does your QMS also establish who is responsible for conducting inspections, tests, or audits?
It does. It lays out very clearly exactly what roles and responsibilities are responsible for each of those.
And much like I asked Boeing, if I were to walk in on your factory floor and ask an average mechanic, do they know what their QMS is and how to research it and how to find it? How confident are you that they would be able to?
I'm confident that I'll say most mechanics know where they're supposed to look for policies and procedures, and that they understand what role they play in the QMS. As to how many of those can tell you all aspects of a quality management system and how it ranges from the floor to dissemination of data to the executive level, I don't know that many are going to have that depth of understanding.
Back to Boeing. FAA Order 8120.22 requires a quality system to be unambiguous and not subject to misinterpretation. Do you feel that Boeing's QMS currently meets that requirement?
I believe in terms of that being a requirement, I think it does. However, I think what we've learned is there are certainly places within our command media, within our policies and procedures, where we have to continually get feedback to see how to clarify as much as possible, while still balancing out not putting in tons of information that make it very complex to comprehend.
Mr. Catlin, similar vein question. From your point of view as an IAM representative, does the IAM feel that Boeing's QMS meets this requirement?
Thank you, Dr. Wood. No, it does not. Boeing's quality system is very complicated. There are so many policies, pros, and not necessarily policies, but pros and BPIs that make up our quality system. And they've been through so many changes, especially over the last 10 years, that it's very ambiguous and open to misinterpretation. One of the biggest changes in Boeing's quality system is the vernacular, changing it from an inspection to a verification, now to a conformance decision. I don't think that the vast majority of our IAM members can define the difference between an inspection, a verification, or a conformance decision.
Does the IAM have a process in place where a member may anonymously self-report a production error or confusion about the QMS or process independent of Boeing?
No, the IAM itself does not. We have, as IAM members, we have been working through the Speak Up system, and when that has failed us, we have turned to FAA hotlines. We have continually submitted large numbers of FAA hotlines when Speak Up let us down and was not able to address our concerns. But as the IAM, no, we do not.
You mentioned something yesterday about SHEER. Can you explain what that is and how that's used?
Can you repeat the word? Did you say fear?
SHEER.
Oh, a SHEER. Yeah, a SHEER is a system that we use when there is a safety concern. If somebody believes that there is a situation on the floor that is a safety concern, we submit what's called a SHEER. And it elevates it through the process to get eyes on it through environmental health and safety and some of the other internal organizations. Plus, it brings the union safety coordinators in to evaluate the situation and determine, is there a fix and how do we get it fixed?
So for me, your we was a little ambiguous there. Is that we the IAM, or does the we include Boeing?
Yeah, it would include Boeing, yes. It's a cross-functional operation where it brings people from Boeing, it brings people from the IAM, and whatever other organizations are necessary to correct the situation on the floor.
So again, if I wanted to submit a SHEER, how do I go about doing that?
There's a system within internal Boeing computers. It's called Enable-On, and you would go into the Enable-On system. You would create a SHEER event, which would generate a report. It assigns it a number, and then you give your details, and then it processes it. It sends it off to several different organizations where it assigns manager responsibility to address the issue to.
Do you have any insight on over, let's say, the last 5 years prior to the accident occurring of approximately how many shears come in?
It's hundreds a year.
And has that pace remained since the accident has occurred?
Yeah, and it can be everything from lights out in the parking lot. It can be to a stand that is creating a situation where somebody could have a fall incident, to a damaged ladder, to, I mean, it covers just about anything that could be determined or considered a safety hazard.
And how do you view the timeliness at which these reports are responded to?
It varies. Depends on the complication of the situation. Some of them are immediately addressed that are the easy ones. Some of them that are much more complicated, they take much longer to address. For example, we had one shear that was filed by one of my union stewards over issues with the fire alarm systems within the factory. That shear was open for 2 years. This last test that we just did last month seemed to have gotten the problem addressed and taken care of. So it all depends on how complicated the issue is.
Going back to Boeing, let's take a 10-year snapshot, if you will. What significant changes or adaptations has your QMS gone through?
Sure, maybe I'll start, and then Doug, you can chime in from a supplier perspective. So over 10 years, it's quite a broad horizon. So as you can imagine, as was discussed yesterday, we've had a number of rate changes across various programs. We obviously had differences in our production system from the perspective of storing many airplanes. I think at one point we had just about every program had planes in a state of storage, which is atypical for a production system. We've had a lot of employee turnover, not just due to COVID, but then just changes in the workforce over time. So there's been quite a bit of change now. That's just some context now for the quality management system. So what we've done is really then looked at it from the perspective of, if you think about how a quality management system is structured to operate, it's continuously improving and continuously looking for corrective action. And so in cases of training, the corrective action would be around supplementing training courses and making sure that more information or tools are available for our teams. We did have changes in that 2017 to 2019 timeframe that were discussed yesterday. All those changes really undone, and a significant amount of effort being put into what we called strengthening our quality management system really over the last 5 years. And so this has been around increasing the number of inspectors, increasing the number of inspections, putting more emphasis around our regulatory compliance. We had a number of commitments that we had to do from a regulatory perspective in terms of how we respond to FAA findings and how we voluntarily disclose. I think that was another amount of work that we did really in the last few years to emphasize more voluntary disclosure for the sake of transparency with the FAA. So to kind of wrap it up, our quality management system continues to evolve based on the environment, but then also based on the performance that we see within the system, and then corrective actions that we have to take accordingly. And Doug, anything you'd like to add there?
Yeah, I'll add a couple of things around our supplier oversight. So I can talk on the time period that I've been in supplier quality, so the last 3, almost 4 years now. In that time frame, we've pretty substantially increased the size of the organization, primarily the people we have out on the field directly interfacing with suppliers. We've increased the number of suppliers where we have permanent on-site presence. We've put additional, and everything I'm framing here is pre-accident, 2023 and prior. We've put additional rigor and structure around the data systems and the data review process. We've put additional rigor and structure around the escalation process we have with suppliers, escalating to a major finding with a supplier, escalating to probation. We've put more structure and rigor around and increased the number of suppliers where we have either pulled full delegation for inspection or put additional inspectors for inspections in place. So that's just over the changes we've had over the last, say, 3.5 years.
Have there been any large fundamental changes since the accident has occurred?
I'll start with supplier quality. Yes, as we mentioned yesterday, we put a full final verification inspection in place on the 737 fuselage at Spirit. That is in place, and then we have a number of changes we're making going forward as part of the comprehensive plan. But in terms of what's in place today, primarily it's around the full tip-to-tail inspections at Spirit.
And I was just going to add around the comprehensive safety and quality plan. Changes we made have included increasing the number of staff that we have from a quality perspective. We're working on getting more auditors to increase internal audits. And then overall, the elements that we put in the plan around strengthening the removals process, strengthening the pickup process, making changes to our overall command media, and then just also looking at any other signals that we need to do from a corrective action perspective in quality. And safety risk assessments on traveled work, for example. There's quite a bit. I don't want to go into all of it right here, right now, but just the comprehensive plan is really the bulk of it.
With each of these iterative changes, what sort of change management process does Boeing undertake?
Yeah, I guess I'll start, and maybe Doug, you can chime in. So one of the things that we've been really mindful of since the accident, as we go review the plan, and a lot of feedback that we received both from the Admiral's team and then also even from just internal stakeholders, is around this topic of change management. That trying to change too many things too quickly can either lead to unintended consequences or different results, or run the risk that they're not implemented as fully and as deeply as we need to. So one of the things that we're being really mindful of is laying out the plan in a way that really paces learning first, taking and incorporating some of those learnings, and then going to scale and deploy. The other thing that we're really being very mindful of is continuing to get feedback from our team. And then I'll use kind of some jargony words. We really just want to be mindful of metering change. So, for example, the BPI 1581 that we released a revision for in July, we're deliberately not going to release another one for another few months. So we give some time for things to stabilize, and then proactively use some communication before doing another release. So from a change management perspective, it's really been all around monitoring for stability and trying to be mindful about not changing things too quickly.
What I'd add to that is we've also started using, and when I say started, late 22, early 2023, safety risk assessments on types of change. So when we're going to do a large change, we will do an SRA. There has been change where we have either paused the change or put additional mitigations in place before we implemented change as a result of a safety risk assessment. So that's a process change that we introduced well over a year ago, almost 2 years ago now.
How is the information about a change disseminated to the factory floor? How do I, as a mechanic, know a change has been made?
It really could be a variety of ways, and we're constantly looking at feedback for how else we can improve some of those communication vehicles. I believe yesterday we talked about alerts, right? So quality alerts or messages that could be sent out. One thing that we learned here just recently in the process of making some changes to the removals process was putting alerts more directly within the manufacturing execution system. So before you go to log in to CMES, you would see an alert message within the actual tool that you interact with. And what we learned there was that had a lot more visibility and connected with and got to more folks much more quickly than some of the other mechanisms that we used in the past. So really we try to take a multi-layered approach to policy dissemination and communication, but one of the things we're continuing to evaluate is how can we improve that and then leverage other tools and other opportunities to get that signal out.
Before I move on to my next question, I would like Mr. Catlin to follow up on this from the point of view of the IAM. how do you regard the information dissemination tactics that Boeing uses to get that information down to the mechanics?
They're not acceptable. So the problem that I have, that we have, that the IAM has, is we will see a document that gets revised over and over and over and over again, and there will be minor changes, such as the example I just previously used, inspection, verification, conformance decision. But it's not clarified. Nobody knows what it means. Nobody can define what it means. Is there a difference between an inspection versus a verification? And so now it's left up to the person who is now reading this new document to make that dissemination. And that then you get into ambiguous and open to misinterpretation. And that is one of the biggest problems that we have faced over the last 5-6 years, is this ambiguous terms that are being used within the quality management system that are being applied in ways differently depending on who it is that's reading the documentation. We continually see this change on change, whether it be BPI 1581, whether it be BPI 2573, 43, 45, where they appear to be slight changes, but they are dramatic changes, because the difference from Boeing's perspective is the difference between an inspection and a verification. Inspections are performed by quality inspectors. Verifications are performed by manufacturing personnel. And that's what VO was all about, converting quality inspections to manufacturing verifications. And today, now those two terms are no longer used. It's now a conformance decision, which in Boeing's eyes can be assigned to whoever they choose.
Mr. Silva, has Boeing ever taken the pulse of the floor, so to speak, to determine how these changes affect the actual workers?
We do. I certainly understand where Mr. Catlin's coming from in terms of one thing I should have mentioned earlier is through our communications, being more upfront around intent and being more upfront at the beginning of any communication on why it changes, and spending more time, not just on the why, but then helping to explain. But in terms of pulsing the floor, we do it through a number of different ways. I think later we'll speak about some reporting channels, but I'll use the removals example here. Recently, we had a workshop in March, or late February, early March, and we included mechanics, inspectors, folks that use and interact with these processes and procedures on a day-to-day basis. That's important, and that's been an element of most, if not all, of the processes that we're looking to change within the comprehensive plan, is really getting out and getting feedback from teammates. I think Doug alluded to some of the changes that we're making from an engineering perspective, even on changing installation plans. It's a requirement, it's necessary that we have to go get the mechanic to give feedback, the inspector to give feedback. Is this installation plan change adequate? Are there different things we can do? I think we can always continue to do more of it. I look forward to continuing to do more of it. But those are some of the mechanisms that we use, and we certainly welcome feedback on how else we can improve that.
So to be clear, when you say feedback, there are two types of feedback. There's active and passive. So active feedback is you are going out there and asking for feedback right now, versus passive feedback where you are waiting and relying on somebody to write a report and then you get that feedback. So which are you talking about?
I'm referring more to the former around active. We also have mechanisms for the latter, but my statements were more around the active feedback.
So pivoting to Spirit, and I know, Mr. Gregg, you've been there since April of this year, but these iterative changes in Boeing's QMS, let's say over the last 10 years, how has that affected you as a major supplier?
I'd actually think I should defer to Mr. Bill Brown on that one.
Yeah, so I would say everything that Boeing has done in their QMS, a lot of that has flowed down to us through the open conversations that we have. I would also say that the things that go well for Boeing that they share with us, we'll adopt those. And the things that are going well for us, Boeing will adopt. But within our QMS over, let's just say the last 5 years, we've made significant changes to the QMS. The QMS itself, the main elements that are part of AS 9100 and ISO 9001, they're the same. They're embedded in our documents. They're clear. We're audited to those. But the work we do within our QMS to improve our systems, things like automated drilling improvements, the investment of MES throughout our 737 system, investments into process product verifications, which tell us, are we building the product correctly? But more importantly is, when I first took over the role as quality leader, we brought for the Wichita plant and asked them, hey, what are the top issues you think we need to go resolve? And we took a top 5 out of all those meetings and started working on them. And one of them was, hey, the experience of our inspectors and the experience of our mechanics isn't good enough. So we brought in an outside auditor. We audited the training program. We realized it's actually pretty good. So why isn't that transferring onto the floor? So we developed what was called employee proficiency verification. We went out and spent about 2 to 3 months in critical areas and audited our employees on, can they read the manuals? Can they get into the engineering? Do they know how to use the tools? And how quickly are they adopting standard processes? And what we learned was when they first come out of school, they're actually pretty good. They're developing quickly. And we saw a very wide range of experience levels all the way up to 15 years with the company, all the way down to 6 months. We used that data to continue to modify our internal training. We also used that information to help our inspectors in critical process points that they were inspecting. So we gave that feedback to them. And I would say finally, one of the things they asked us was a feedback loop, and we developed Quality 360, which anybody in this room can file a Quality 360 report at Spirit. Just need a QR code. You go to your phone, and you can fill it out. You can do it anonymously, or you can give us your name. If you give it anonymously, we'll give you a code, so you can always check up what we're doing and close that feedback loop with you. But we go out on the floor for every one of those and investigate it. If you tell us who you are, we bring you into the process so we can understand what those issues are and continue to improve our QMS. I think that's what we've done beyond what Boeing has shared with us to continue to get our employees engaged in QMS.
So Spirit is in a unique situation to where you have your own QMS because you have other customers than just Boeing that's internal, but then you are also subject to Boeing's QMS. How do you manage that? Are there ever points where things might conflict in how you want things to be managed within your system? And if so, how does that resolve?
I'm struggling in just my short time there to think of an event where we disagreed on the root cause or a corrective action. I think that with the open dialogue that we do have, there's a lot of common ground, and we're able to arrive at joint decisions pretty easily.
You said there was no example, so I guess I was going to follow up with, is there any time that you can remember where one trumps the other, and who would have that authority?
Yeah, I could give you an example. Well, within our QMS, there are certain customer requirements that Boeing has that they ask us to abide to. And as an example, there may be a fastener that was installed improperly, and we put a freeze plug in, which is per our engineering and okay. Boeing may come in and say, hey, we don't like that, change the skin. So we'll get into those conversations. What's the right thing to do for the airplane? But what does the customer want as well? And when Boeing says, change it, the customer wants that done, we'll do that. But it's definitely a conversation within our QMS of it's okay, but they still want us to change it.
Okay, and thank you for that, because we had heard some from yesterday's panels to where there could be a disagreement on how something should be approached. And I was wondering a little bit more from a QMS point of view as to how those issues might be resolved. Sticking with Spirit, please. You talked a little bit about some of your internal metrics and processes in place to maintain quality control. And you alluded to just a little while ago that if there's something that you have a process that you think is benchmarkable, I would like to know more about that. If there's something that you find that you would like to benchmark, how do you push that information back to your customers and most specifically Boeing?
Could you get? I'm struggling to remember the benchmark comment.
I'm asking. There was no specific comment. I'm
Okay.
telling you. You were saying that there's sometimes that we have a process that's great and we share it with Boeing and maybe they change their QMS. That was discussion that just happened a little while ago. So what I'm wondering is if you develop something, a better way of doing something, a benchmark for doing something, what kind of conversations happen with Boeing and to ensure that the QMS change is adopted?
Okay. Yeah, I think it's the same conversations that we're having when things are flowing our direction from the Boeing company as well. Between Doug and myself, his direct reports on site in Wichita, and our team, as well as Mike Riney up at who's stationed up at Renton and Boeing. The conversations, they happen very frequently, and again, even back to the examples he gave a few minutes ago, I'm thinking more of the larger root cause corrective action type items, not necessarily fasteners that we may disagree on, but just even the final product verification that we've implemented at the Wichita facility to make sure that we're delivering conforming product to Renton Boeing. We have established shoulder-to-shoulder inspections. We have come up with training that we believe gets us much greater alignment on what a nonconformance actually looks like, ensuring that we are always tracing back to the Boeing spec and able to come to agreement on those so that we can, again, ship conforming product in a timely manner. So I think that that's one example of how we're able to establish that and push that back into the Boeing company.
And do you find the Boeing company amenable to these sorts of suggestions?
I have found them to be very strong working partners with us on those, yes. If they have a disagreement, they have stated that, and we have come to resolution on those, probably much the way that Bill eloquently described it.
Mr. Silva, the Boeing QMS manual mentions escapes. And it largely refers to those escapes as being like defects in manufacturing and engineering. How does Boeing track escapes, and what becomes of that information if the escapes exceeds the threshold?
Sure. A few different ways, and some of this actually might bleed a little bit into some of the discussion we'll have from an SMS perspective. But a few years ago, as we were maturing our SMS forums, we started tracking escapes across our value stream. And so to put a little bit more context around the definition from the quality manual, an escape would be, say, something that left an external supplier like Spirit, left their system and got introduced into our system, or even an internal supplier like a fabrication site within the Boeing production system. Escapes can also be when they leave from the factory out to a flight line or pre-delivery, or even from pre-delivery out into one of our customers. And so through the joint SMS QMS review of data, we would track and monitor those escapes at an aggregate level across all those different parts of the value stream. We would then set up control limits to monitor generally how stable those amounts were. And then once those control limits were exceeded, that would warrant corrective action or warrant us to do further investigation and determine what else we could do to get those escapes down. In the case of supplier escapes, for example, and my colleague Doug Ackerman can speak a lot to that at a very detailed level, but those would be interventions or countermeasures that we would put in there. And then internal escapes, or things that left from our factory to our flight line or from our flight line to our customer, very similar process. We would investigate for corrective action. Paul, anything you want to add?
Yeah, I think just to clarify, in 2023, we were tracking where escapes were happening in the value stream. And so if we were seeing escapes in the field, that would tell us something was getting past our factory processes, and we were doing it by location in the value. Since the accident, we've relooked at that, and the KPIs we feel are going to be more effective are types of escapes as opposed to where in the value stream. So to just clarify when and the before and after there.
That is a great segue into a question I have about 2 questions from now. But before I get to that, we talked a lot about essentially supplier escapes, supplier nonconformances. What I want to know now is, has the number of internal escapes, how has that fluctuated over the last 5 years or so?
As Paul was referring to, so back in the 2021 through 2023 timeframe, where we saw a fluctuation of internal escapes was really from our factory out to our flight line. We were seeing actually some positive trends from the flight line out to customers, so seeing a reduction in escape out to customers, and we were seeing less of internal to the factory escapes, so say maybe from one major build position to another. But where we saw the fluctuation go up was from the factory to the flight line, and so that, from a value stream perspective, got us involved in terms of corrective actions to what we call pushing the defects back, but really go investigate what are the sources of defects that are getting out to the flight line, how do we get teams to go take corrective action on them, and then help bring that back down.
How does Boeing classify quality control deficiencies that are a result of human error?
Probably the closest way we currently have, and this was during the accident, even currently now, that we have to classify issues like those would be within our non-conformance system. Every single non-conformance gets a code assigned to it to describe what the issue was and then what the potential cause of the issue was. And so those would typically get written up as what we label internally workmanship issues. But if you were really to unpack those, that would probably be the closest umbrella that we have towards human error or human factor type codes. It is an area we're investigating further in terms of how we can improve the coding we make and how we can get better visibility on those types of issues. But right now, that would probably be the closest way, and it's not the best.
And that's, I guess, how long has that been in place? Is that since the accident or prior to?
Prior to and since, yes. Everything I just described has just been how we've operated in terms of how our manufacturing execution system works for nonconformances.
So is refining that understanding of how human error is introduced, is that going to be part of your comprehensive quality and safety plan going forward?
Yes.
We're here because an accident happened, right? It took place. At what point should this escape have been caught and contained? Taking your QMS system and how it's structured, at what point should this escape have been caught?
And just to make sure I'm clarifying, when you say this escape, you mean the lack of removal documentation?
Yes.
Yes. I'd say as we discussed yesterday throughout panels 1 and 2, and I don't have we could certainly pull up the timeline, but typically that escape should have been caught either within that time range for the removal to be written and to have that documentation, or at the absolute latest prior to the rollout of the airplane.
And the reason I ask, my point by that is that an error was committed. Essentially, the error we all know here is that bolts were not reinstalled, but one error in a robust system should not be able to progress all the way to an accident. So that's why I'm probing. Point, should the error have been caught? It's not about whether or not the error should have happened in the first place. That's neither here nor there.
Right.
It's in your system, where should the error have been stopped in its tracks? Okay. Spirit, similar questions. How do you define escapes within your quality management system?
Escapes within our quality management system are going to be non-conformances that are found or detected after our last opportunity to find it ourselves within our quality inspection processes. It may be something that is brought to our attention in most cases directly from Boeing after the product's been delivered.
And how do you classify quality control discrepancies that are a result of human error?
We have a set number of categories. I think much along the line of the answer that these gentlemen gave. Oftentimes I'll see a response, and this, again, my short time there, I'll see a response such as failure to follow procedure. That's the first why. It's not the last why that you ask. It could be, we know it's a result of workmanship. We often know that maybe it's a failure to follow procedure, maybe it's an inexperience, maybe it's ineffective training, whatever it may be. But there are a number of different categories available after you drill down to exactly why it occurred.
So what are some of the mitigation strategies you have? What do you do after the corrective action process has run its course?
Well, after root cause analysis occurs and we understand exactly what we think drove it, it generally leads to a number of different mitigations. Some of those may be enhanced training. Some of those may be communication in the form of quality alerts, crew meetings, quality stand-downs, mistake proofing, developing engineering solutions so that the workmanship problem is greatly reduced, if not eliminated altogether.
And for Boeing, my last couple questions about QMS is essentially, at what point does your QMS interface with your SMS?
Sure, I think we have a slide that speaks a little bit to that. Maybe if we could pull up Boeing presentation. I believe it's slide 7. So I offered one specific example earlier, but really to take a step back, the within Boeing, they're highly complementary. Quality system and the quality management system very much focused on the quality of products and services from a compliance to our policies and procedures, and then conformance to all our requirements. And then the safety management system really focused around safety performance of all of these processes. And so the example I gave earlier of the escapes, we would track that information within the build portion of what you see in the middle of the screen, where we would look at conformance information like quality escapes, and then assess that against, do they present safety risks. And so this was kind of the beginnings of the journey of how we have both systems complement each other. At the time of the accident, this is how we would have operated. One of the things we're doing now as part of our plan is then to obviously strengthen that integration much tighter. But this would generally give you the overview of how the two operated in that time frame. And Paul, anything you'd add?
We could talk for quite a while on this one, but I'll just add a little. We do have in this system, it's a very broad system that covers the SMS hazards that are part of the triggers of the SMS standards, but it includes our continuous operational safety program, our notification of escape program, the thread of safety that travels through our design and supply chain, through our build and through our fleet. So as we have QMS interactions with the SMS, there's definitely safety risk management activity on things that hit the triggers for the proactive side of SMS, but there's also the event-based pieces where we interact, and we have a board structure that looks after that.
Apologies for going backwards for just a moment. Going back to the identification of escapes, identification of this error, for instance. Under what system or who was responsible for walking the floor on a daily? Was there anyone out there that should have noted that, for instance, in this specific incident, that this plug was open and then maybe looked around to see if there's any paperwork associated with it?
I would say at a system level, in terms of how we operate, and some of this alludes to the factory trade structure. Throughout our entire production system, you would have mechanics, inspectors, managers, senior managers, whose obligation is to really walk the floor. And I want to focus on, from a management perspective, their responsibility to also be attuned to what's going on within the system, and not just operating to identify feedback from teammates, but then just making sure the system is operating as intended. I can't speak to if is there one particular person that should have just been doing something.
So in the aftermath of this accident, is that something that you being over core quality, is that something that your team is looking at?
I think as part of our comprehensive plan, we are looking at how we, one of the things that we did recently was at a workshop around how we look to give significant amount of time back to our managers to make sure that they are much more embedded within the production floor at a manager and senior manager level.
And then my last question again about that intersection between QMS and SMS is, you just talked about like event-based triggers. Are there any specific triggers that automatically start a conversation or a meeting or something between the SMS leadership and the QMS leadership?
Yeah, absolutely. So when we, an example of an event-based trigger that automatically starts that process would be the notification of escapement process that Doug could speak to quite a bit. What part of that process is to determine if there's a safety issue with that escapement and to determine how far into the production or fleet that event has occurred. So the safety review board process that we have, it's part of continued operational safety, but also part of our production safety. We would have a team with the subject matter experts from safety engineering and whatever disciplines are needed to determine if that escapement is a safety issue and to determine what type of compliance period would be recommended to rectify it.
Okay, thank you. At this point, this concludes my question on QMS.
Thank you, Dr. Woods. We're going to take a 15-minute break to 10:45. And we will see you. Please be back here promptly at 10:45 and in your seats.